going to go ahead and get started. I was going to leave it open first for any questions that you might have regarding the last lecture. So go ahead, and if you want, you can post in the chat and I should be able to see it. I've got two monitors again, if you didn't hear that last time. So any questions you got throughout the duration of this, just go ahead and post them and I'll get to them as soon as I see them. Sometimes there is a little delay in the video and the streaming, so if I jump backwards, that's why. But if you want to say hi, go ahead. Let me know you're here. I see I've got 3 viewers. Was it 7? Now 3, 2. Well, it's getting worse. I better work on my skills of presenting here. So again, if you got any questions, just go ahead and start them off. Otherwise, we'll jump right into it. Question for you all is, anybody having trouble viewing the videos or anything like that? Technical problems, audio, or anything like that? Any feedback is definitely welcomed. I see Cole said hi. Hope you're doing well today, Cole. Thanks for tuning in. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions along the way, like I said, I'll stop and get to them. So again, any feedback you got for me would be really nice and appreciative. So last time we were talking about Darwin and his journey to the Galapagos Islands. While he was there, he noticed a diversity of species, and he hypothesized that many of these individuals came from the mainland of South America and made it to the islands. But as they made it to the islands, there was a limited amount of resources, such as food, shelter, or whatever else. So they started diversifying off into these niches or special little habitats that required certain traits. And as such, these traits were selected for. They became more predominant over time. And you saw that in the finches that Darwin collected. So looking at the birds again here on this slide, you can see there are a number of beaks out there that are totally different for each island. Some are used for getting insects, probing, or just crushing seeds altogether. But again, that's what the diversity he saw. So I see you got some other people tuning in today too. I got Ethan and Chase. What's up, guys? The understanding, so overall, as he looked at these individuals, he began to hypothesize that maybe it was the artificial selection process that we as humans do, that we are selecting for certain traits that we find desirable. Maybe the environment was selecting for certain traits invisibly for these traits that were most important to that ecosystem, which allow them to survive. So this invisible hand guiding species as they change over time. So this is an interesting little story here, is about the Arctic hare, heritable variation in a population. Some traits give certain individuals an advantage over others. So in this Arctic hare case here, as you see on the right, the Arctic hare during the winter months turns completely white. That's to blend in with the environment, the snow that it might encounter. While later it turns its coat color to brown as it matures more into spring and fall. And you're thinking, why is that? Well, the snow melts, there's more dead leaves, branches, twigs. That way the predators can't pick it out, because otherwise a white rabbit standing out in a field of brown green grass looks like a bowl of chocolate or vanilla ice cream out there. So I can just imagine a hawk swooping in, eating that thing right up. Same vice versa, if it was a brown rabbit in the snow, I mean, you stand out. So you want to be able to blend in with your environment. Somewhere along the way, these rabbits, one of them at one time had a mutation, a trait that allowed its fur coat color to change. Well, being it survived, it passed on its genes, and it became more successful, more suitable for that habitat. And as such, many of its individual offspring had the same trait, and it continued to persist, making this Arctic hare very unique when it comes to seasonal changes. Darwin's theory of natural selection, he narrowed it down to 4 basic principles: variation, heritability, overproduction, and reproductive advantage. We're going to talk about all 4 of these just briefly to kind of get you an idea of what they mean and how they apply to the environment itself. Theory of natural selection, again, the variation. Individuals in population differ from one another. Absolutely. I'm using sunflowers for this case, as you can see in the picture. Some sunflowers, for example, they're just average height. Some are smaller, some of them are really tall, like the one you see in the photo. Just as we look at our population of people, there are those individuals that are really tall, and there's individuals that are really short, like me. So, again, just a plethora of individual traits out there in every population. Okay, causes to this mutations a lot of times to the DNA. There are genes out there that control your height. There's genes that control sunflower height. And as such, sometimes a mutation happens and you get larger than normal sunflowers or shorter than normal sunflowers. What's the advantage? You may not see the advantage right away, but in long term, it could be an advantage for whatever reason. But you never know until that circumstances arise. So, what causes the mutations? Again, we've talked about some of these. Ultraviolet radiation, inbreeding sometimes can cause weird things to occur that not necessarily are they always favorable, but they can bring up weird traits every now and then. Random chance, even, that a mutation gets misplaced, and as such, you create a new protein altogether, which means a new trait. So, that's variation in a population. Pretty simple, pretty self explanatory. Heritability is traits are passed from one generation to the next. Example would be tall sunflowers when you mate them together. You're going to get more tall sunflowers. And short sunflowers, when you mate those together, you get more short sunflowers. Very similar to what we talked about with genetics in Darwin and his pea plants. When you took the purebred yellow, breed them together, you get more yellow. More purebred green, you get green. It's not until you cross those two together, if you can, do you get a combination of different traits, which is kind of unique too. So again, whatever traits you have, you're going to pass them on. That's heritability. That's all you can do. Overproduction is a very interesting one and sometimes hard to understand, but it is very essential for some species and their survival. Populations ultimately will produce more offspring than can survive. Okay, that doesn't make any sense, right? But hear me out. More numbers increase the odds of species survival. So it's the survival of the fittest. You're like, what do you mean? So think about this. As a, say, mouse population, mice produce a lot of little baby mice within a given litter. So they can have up to like 12 to 14 mice. Cool. Well, the mice know that they're kind of like they're going to get eaten. So producing more babies overall ensures the survival of the species per se, rather than just, hey, I'm going to put all my money on one mouse, which could be eaten the next day. So if that's the case, now you're in trouble. So typically, species as a whole produce more offspring than can survive. It's kind of like a shotgun effect. Put them all out there with all these various traits. The ones that have the best traits will hopefully survive, elude predators, find enough resources, and compete for that food or survival, whatever it may be. That's just overproduction. So, do we as human population do that? Um, Sometimes, but not necessarily as much as we've progressed into modern society. Back in the day, yeah, you believe it or not, people did have 10 kids, and a lot of times they had 10 kids because they needed help on the farm and stuff like that. Growing crops, working cattle, whatever it was. But they also realized, and this is a hard thing to understand, is that many children died back in the day at birth, that they didn't live always, and that's changed quite a bit in our society. With our advancements in healthcare and those facilities to take care of those babies and stuff like that. But we didn't have that back in the day, so there was a high infant mortality rate back in the day. So yeah, people still had a lot of children back in the days because they might die and they get a virus or something else, whatever it may be. So overproduction is a thing that doesn't always apply to just mice. It can apply to humans too, depending on the circumstance. Okay, so some examples: some sunflowers germinate while some don't. So as you can see in the photo, some of them germinated, some of them did not. Reproductive advantage. Advantageous variations allow offspring that possess them a better chance of producing more offspring. So basically, if you have traits that grant you, I don't know, the ability to find more food, make you look better or for whatever reason, then you have a better chance than the one starving over there in the corner to pass on your genes. So yeah, I mean, overall, having good genes allows you to be more suitable to your environment and therefore pass on those genes ultimately, and therefore your offspring and next generation will possess those things too. Examples: different habitats in different conditions may affect which survive tall or short sunflowers. for whatever reason. Okay, so maybe the sunflowers have to compete with other plants, and they need to be tall. While some of them they don't need to be very tall because the wind would knock them over in a windy area. So again, just depends on the habitat and conditions in which they live. Now, this is an interesting story here. Alfred Wallace. You've probably never heard of him, but you probably have heard of Darwin prior to this lecture, even. So, Charles Darwin came up with this idea of natural selection. However, he wasn't the only cat in town that came up with this theory. This young man named Alfred Wallace. His story begins a long time ago, about the same time frame as Darwin. So Alfred Wallace was a young man that grew up dirt poor. When I mean dirt poor, I mean they had dirt. Like that's all they owned. They were just impoverished people. His parents and stuff, they worked in factories, jobs, mines, whatever it was. He himself loved school, absolutely loved it. He tried to stay in school as long as he could, but as you know, society, food is more important than necessarily books back in the day. So he was forced to work, but every chance he got, he would read books late at night and stuff like that, furthering his education. Really taking initiative to be more than just somebody that worked in the mine or a factory worker or somebody that just barely got by. He loved knowledge. He saved every dime and penny that he ever made, um, other than just buying the essential foods that he needed, and actually got enough money to buy supplies and charter a trip, believe it or not, to South America because he himself wanted to be, get this, an acclaimed scientist. That's what he wanted to be. That was his goal, was to be a acclaimed scientist, that people would read his work and go, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He got on a boat to South America, same destination that Charles Darwin went to, and he collected several species, documented, took notes, journals, everything. He had enough information to really probably find the same findings as Darwin. He got all the way back to London. It was there in the harbor. The ship's sailing in. He's ready to go. All of a sudden, the ship catches fire, burns the whole thing. Every last piece of work, everything that he had, gone. Narrowly escaped with his own life. Lost all of his money, all of his research. His hopes and dreams sank and burnt to the bottom of the harbor that day. But that didn't stop him. He then worked again, saved up more money, and he got a ship ride to Malaysia, over there in the Philippines kind of area. Went all the way over there, and he was out there working, and he was collecting resources again. Limited budget because, of course, he didn't have as much money. Still working, and all of a sudden, tropical area, gets bit by a mosquito, and gets malaria. Wow. You know, this guy just had it rough all around. Didn't have any money, grew up poor. Then all the stuff he had got burnt in the harbor, narrow escape of his life, gets to go on to a second chance and gets malaria. But he was sitting there on his deathbed, shivering, fever, thinking he was going to die, couldn't do much of anything. And he thought, well, since I can't do anything, what I can do is think about my research. Wow. I mean, this is how dedicated the guy was. He thought about his research on his deathbed, and finally, one day, his fever broke, and he survived malaria by random chance. And he thought, wow, I don't know why I survived. He's like, I just must be a little different than everybody else, that I must have something that no one else does, just that natural variation. And he's like, holy smokes, that's how it is. That's how species change. Some of them have it, some of them don't. The ones that are the strongest survive. He quickly wrote down some papers on his theory on natural selection of how it works, and he was spot on accurate. He then could not take it back to the Royal Science Academy for them to review, so he sent it to the one person he thought he could trust, an acclaimed scientist that he looked up to, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin hadn't published his book on natural selection yet. Uh-oh. Charles Darwin had been dragging his feet for 10 years. Many of his friends said, you need to finish this up, you need to finish this up. And he was just taking his sweet time, no worries. And then all of a sudden he gets this package in the mail from a young scientist named Alfred Wallace describing exactly what he was writing in his book. What? So, the rest of the story. Charles Darwin consulted with his friend, and his friend said, "Look, Darwin, I don't tell you, you could easily lose that manuscript and say you never got it. I mean, the mail's faulty." And he said, "Or you could just take them both to the scientific community and say, hey, this is my work, finish it up real quick, and say this is Alfred Wallace's. You guys decide." As a gentleman, Charles Darwin took both works to the scientific community and said, "Look, here's my theory on natural selection. This young man, Alfred Wallace, also has the same idea. I want you guys to decide." He put all of his time and efforts and work into this book, and he was willing to hand it over to the scientific community, and they could have sided with Alfred Wallace, but they didn't. They ended up siding with Charles Darwin. They sided with Charles Darwin because he had 10 years worth of work and research into his book, while Alfred Wallace did not. So they said, well, looks like Charles Darwin arrived at this conclusion a little before Alfred Wallace. So they gave the theory of natural selection and evolution to Charles Darwin, not Alfred Wallace. Charles Darwin wrote back to Alfred Wallace and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry to tell you, but I had come up with this idea about 10 years prior. I took both of our works to the scientific community. They sided with me," and went on. He said, "However, I did cite your manuscript in my book, if that's all right. That way everyone knows that you too came up with this." Alfred Wallace was like, all right. He was pretty excited because he knew that Charles Darwin was a acclaimed scientist and everybody read his book, that his name would be there, and so forth down the line. He actually went on to publish many papers talking about the evolution of butterflies in that area, became an acclaimed scientist down there. It totally transformed his world. And today, he also coined the terms Darwinism and also helped define the term of species, which is pretty cool. So Alfred Wallace is kind of one of those unsung heroes that doesn't get a lot of credit, but he too came up with some pretty remarkable things at the time. And if you've noticed some of the posters around my room, you've probably seen pictures like these, and it's called Operation Wallacey, and actually in honor of Alfred Wallace. And it all started around that area that students could take internships and stuff down there to do research for this particular operation and whatnot. They have to do some extensive fundraising and pay to do all this, but it looks really good on scholarships and applications and stuff, depending on what you want to do. But there are opportunities out there. But again, Operation Wallacey, all because of Alfred Wallace. So, all right, that's all I have for today, talking about the natural selection theories and the principles. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. If not, I will later post the discussion board and also the video quiz. And I'll double check that I posted the quiz in there with it, because my advanced biology I forgot to do so. So if you have any technical problems like that ever, just email me quickly and I'll get it resolved as soon as possible. All right, any questions whatsoever? I would like to thank you guys for tuning in. I know, again, it's kind of hard sometimes to wake up and want to do schoolwork, but I really appreciate you guys bettering yourselves and watching the video, tuning in. So thank you guys for being awesome. You really are great students. Keep up the great work and definitely be careful out there. We do have some confirmed cases of coronavirus in Macon County, so just wash your hands and be careful. All right, any questions whatsoever? Well, thank you, Chase, for tuning in. Like I said, I really do appreciate it. So it does mean a lot to me that you guys tune in. So even though there's only about 6 of you today, that's all right. Like I said, I'm just glad you guys tuned in. So, all right, guys, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to cut you loose and will not waste any more of your time. So get out there, play some video games, and it might be a nice day. So go for a walk. Take care, guys.